You know him, you love him, as the managing editor of Flames Nation. And my understanding, I have it on good authority, that will become a noted author later on this winter as well. I believe his first book comes out.
I think it's penciled for the spring.
The spring?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's coming out still, right?
Oh, yeah. It'll be out during the season.
It'll be out during the season. That's all we need to know. But noted author, Ryan Pike, kind enough to rejoin us as our Flames and NHL insider again this season. Did you get much of a break this summer? Was it, I mean, compared to summers past, I would say compared to last year, much quieter, but in a different way, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a product of just sort of the way things are, because I think, you've spoken quite a bit both today and in days past about, the fact is the Flames brought in a general manager who's very familiar with the hockey club, and they brought in a head coach that's very familiar with the hockey club. But, the problem is, even if one or both of those gentlemen want to make sweeping changes, it takes two to tango. And, I've been talking to folks around the game, and everyone's jammed up. There are maybe a half dozen teams that have cap space, and they're asking an arm and a leg and firstborn child to do anything. Mm-hmm. And if you're, say, hypothetically, the Calgary Flames, and Noah Hanifin has reportedly told the club, yeah, I'll play out my contract, but I'm probably going to go somewhere else after that. No hard feelings, which is his prerogative. That's his right as someone who's under contract for only 1 year. He was straight up with them by all accounts. If you're the Flames and you want to maximize his value, you probably in your mind have an idea of what you're willing to settle for. And the reason why we haven't seen trades at this point is the Flames simply haven't gotten an offer that was remotely close to what they wanted to settle for. I would say the same kind of thing is in the case of Dan Vladar. I mean, those are the two trades everyone and their dog has been going, hey, Pike, when are they trading Vladar so they can bring Wolf up? And the answer is when they get a deal that they don't hate. And the problem is with everyone having, cap space. I wrote about this in the mailbag this morning on Monday on the site.
Yep.
I think the big challenge is, so we're at the point now where, optimism, sometimes blind optimism, reigns supreme in September and October because everyone's undefeated. Absolutely. Everyone's in the best shape of their lives, except for us media types. And some of us are in the worst shape of our lives. But the idea is optimism reigns supreme and everyone's undefeated. And, oh boy, just watch this person's going to have a bounce back. And, one of our readers suggested the Buffalo Sabres, for example, as a potential fit for a Hanifin and or Vladar trade. And the problem is, much like a lot of teams, the Sabres have made a bunch of moves already, and they probably feel okay about the 7 or 8 defensemen they have coming into camp on one ways. And B, they have in Devon Levi a very respected and decorated collegiate goalie who they think could be as good as Dustin Wolf. So, if you're, and I think, not just a nitpick about Buffalo, but I think if you go through the entirety of the NHL, there are probably 32 teams out there who feel fairly good about their NHL tandems having done their tweaks. Yep. And it won't be until somebody comes to camp and looks horrible, for lack of a better term, until somebody gets hurt or somebody wildly underperforms, you don't really see a lot of dominoes toppling.
No, and I was going to, I think Vladar and Hanifin are different from this standpoint. I think Vladar can solve, that issue can be solved, and I hate to be morbid like this, but it's with a significant injury, right? Somebody goes down with a significant injury. He has a cap hit that's friendly. I think that's how that one gets solved. Hanifin's not that. I mean, yeah, defensemen are going to get injured, but that's still not that.
Yeah, and if Rob, if you and I were GMs and you and I were trying to make a trade, it wouldn't take a lot for me to convince you that I wouldn't say the Flames have misused Dan Vladar, because I don't think that's the case. I think they've used him quite well for a guy with so little NHL experience. But if you're the Flames and the mandate is get there and try to make some noise once you get there, you're going to lean on the guy you're paying $6 million for. You're going to lean on the guy who, a year ago when Jacob Markstrom had his Norris or his Vezina runner-up season.
I knew what you meant.
When he had that season, I think there's a lot of folks around the league, especially in Western Canada, folks who are very familiar with him and who went, That makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. And that's sort of the potential that the Flames see in him, and that's the potential that I think they still see in him. So they didn't really use, like, Vladar doesn't have showy numbers because Vladar basically, the gig was to come in and, you're the reset guy. You're the mop-up guy. You're going to be playing the middle game in 3 and 4 nights or the end game in 3 and 4 nights. So it's kind of the same role that David Riddick got. And I think, it speaks to, I think in a lot of ways, how good Vladar has been, that he's adapted to a really tough job as a relatively untested young pro. And I think, that's the kind of context that you would be given to your potential trade partners, being like, oh, well, he could easily be a 1B, easily. Has he been one here? Well, yes, that's not really the role he's been asked to do. I think you can sell him.
You know who he reminds me of? I hate when everybody goes, oh, it's not just like this, but it reminds me a little bit of Ben Bishop. If you remember Ben Bishop's, he was an Ottawa Senator. Who remembers that, right? And to me, that's what Vladar is. Vladar is that big goalie.
Jacob Markstrom was that. When he was in Florida, well, he was sort of caught down the depth chart a bit, and that's how he ended up in Vancouver, because there was a lot of shuffling that had to be done in Vancouver because Markstrom was sort of the guy that he was around the periphery of that roster.
But I don't think Vladar has that many. Vladar doesn't have that much American League experience, though, right? Because he played in Boston, and then he's played here as a young guy. You know what I mean? As a goalie, right? And I think we've seen this movie before. I have no doubt in my mind that you and I could be talking in 2 or 3 years from now about Dan Vladar being an all-star starter on another team. I could see that.
He's got the, I don't think we talk enough about the wealth of good goaltenders the Flames have in their system right now, because
I needed to ask you that. Yeah.
Because Jacob Markstrom was the second team All-Star, runner-up for the Vezina a couple of years ago. Disclosure: I had him fourth on my ballot for the All-Star. I didn't have him, but he's really, like, he was one of a handful of guys that could have been an All-Star.
It was a good year.
He had an excellent year. Yeah. In a year where a lot went well for the Flames. Your second goalie is a guy who's 25, 26, and still really scratching the surface of what he could be, especially in a realm where, unless you're a high-end prospect or high-end pick, you really don't get pushed to the front of the line in systems anymore for a while, because teams are so risk-averse. And, with goalies, you should be. Yeah. Your number 3 is the reigning MVP of the AHL and has been the top goaltender in his league every year since he's been drafted. Yeah. And his draft year, he was a first team All-Star of the WHL. Like, he's been a legit high-end goaltender in every league he's played in for at least the past 5 years. And the year before that, he was backing up Carter Hart. So he has a good resume. Yep. Oscar Dansk, I think, is one of those guys where, again, we talk about how tough it is to play behind Markstrom. Playing behind Dustin Wolf is a really thankless job, because, unless Wolf gets called up, you're not really going to be used a lot. And I think you have to have a certain kind of mentality to succeed in that role. And I think Oscar Dansk on and off the ice, I've heard rave reviews about him.
They love him.
Yeah, and he's the exact type of human being you need for that kind of role, because especially if the idea is in a year or two, maybe you're going to start cycling non-Dustin Wolf young goalies through that system. Oscar Dansk could carve out a pretty good living for himself just being, the Crash Davis of the net in for the Wranglers. But I think that's a really important role to have. And then when you get beyond him, I mean, they have, they just announced the prospect camp roster today. Yep. Connor Murphy and Matt Radomski are on AHL deals. They're probably going to Rapid City unless somebody gets moved or somebody gets hurt. And, Rapid City has not signed anybody to ECHL deals for this year for goaltenders. So I think they're probably operating on the assumption that Radomski and or Murphy are down there. Both of them collegiate goalies coming off of pretty good collegiate careers. Radomski played a game as backup behind Dansk when Dustin Wolf got called up to the NHL at the end of the season. They know them both pretty well, having them had them in camp for a bit. And they both went to, they both got AHL deals and then went to dev camp. So they're guys they know. And then, behind there, you got Yegor Yegorov in Russia, and you have perhaps one of the more underrated prospects in the system in Arseny Sergeyev at University of Connecticut. So they're about, in terms of prospects of note, they have a lot of different options. And I think when you have that ability to find interesting people, interesting players throughout the hockey world, it gives you the ability to sort of mix and match and, player hand. And right now, the hand they have is they have perhaps the best goaltender not in the NHL, to steal a Jay Feasterism. And he's waiver exempt. They don't have to do anything necessarily with him this year or next year. And so I don't think you necessarily want to hold him back because of the waiver system. But he also gives the ability that you don't need to go out tomorrow and make a bad trade just to free up a spot.
So Jack was asking me that before. I think I got this wrong. They don't have to carry 3.
No.
Okay.
It isn't like Yoni Ortio. They're not going to lose somebody because they want to carry 3 goalies. If they carry 3 goalies, they have the ability to sort of just, send him down on off days or call him up on off days. I don't think a 3 goalie system has ever worked well in the National Hockey League, or at least in recent memory in this city, it hasn't worked very well.
But you've seen peers of yours, not suggesting it was Flames Nation, but peers of yours have been writing about, well, the 3 goalie system is the route to go to keep people, rested and things like that.
The year the Flames finally bit the bullet and brought up Trevor Kidd full time after he was playing for the national team, they brought up Trevor Kidd, and they had to keep Jason Muzzatti up because of waivers. They had to keep Mike Vernon up because he was Mike Vernon, and then they also had Jeff Reese up because Jeff Reese still had a contract, and they carried 4 goalies for the first 6 weeks of the season, and then. Thankfully, Jeff Reese got hurt, and then they only had to carry 3, and then they just bit the bullet, sent Muzzatti down. Ideally, for so many reasons, practices, like you only got 2 nets, you're going to rotate guys. Like, unless there's strong extenuating circumstances that dictate you got to carry more than 2,
I agree.
You shouldn't carry more than 2.
No, but you know what? I think I got lulled into this conversation so much that, and I said to Jack, I was going to have to ask you this because I got lulled into this conversation so deep that I thought they had to carry all 3, but you're right. He's waiver exempt, so he could go up and down, but you want to make, like, at some point, what else can the guy do? You got to, and Ryan, I might be making a big mountain out of a molehill here, but if you, not bury Wolf, but let's say you keep Wolf down there, right? And you don't play him or anything like that. That's also a message. That's the other potential players. People, you want to be like, I think there's been a couple of players over the last couple of years that I think some internally didn't like the way they were dealt with because it sent a bad message to potential players who might join the organization because of the way they were handled.
Yeah. And I've been critical. Like Danny and I had a nice conversation when I was on with him a couple weeks ago about Sam Bennett. And I think we also touched on Yusuf Valimaki. In both those cases, I mean, keeping a player in a specific situation to maximize your flexibility, it's tough because you're going to have to live with, like, either way, you're going to have to live with your decision. So what happened with Sam Bennett is Bennett blew out his shoulder in training camp. He already had an existing shoulder injury, I believe, when he got drafted. And then it was exacerbated a bit in training camp. And then he got his shoulder surgery. He was out most of the year. He went back to Kingston. And then when Kingston got knocked out of the playoffs, they brought him up and he made his NHL debut at the very last day, I believe, of 14-15. And then he was around for the playoffs. And the Flames, they used him in the playoffs, and they should have. He was very good. He was easily, one of their
He was an energy guy.
Yeah, he fit exactly what they needed him to do. And so there's really, it would have sent a worse message to not use him in the playoffs than to use him. You had him available, so you got to use him because where are you going to put him? Just sit him down somewhere. But I think the challenge was the following year. He struggled a bit at times in his first and second year, and they had, because of his age, they had the opportunity to send him back to the O. They had the opportunity to send him back to the AHL a second year. Like just for spoilers, everybody, when a 20-year-old player is signed, you got 3 years of waiver exemption for a skater and 4 years for a goalie. That's why Wolf is going to be waiver exempt till he's just before his 24th birthday.
Right.
For Sam Bennett, they had the ability to send him down for the first 3 years of his entry-level deal. They kept him up partially because it'd be a bit awkward to send him down after he spent a year and a half in the NHL. But depending on what the plan was, I think you could sell that. You could have gone, well, if you're going to be a center, we want you to go down and learn center at the AHL level and be an all-star center at the AHL, and we'll see you at Christmas. Same with Yusuf Valimaki. I think that the challenge with Yusuf Valimaki is the waiver clock kept going on him after he got injured. And then by the time he finally got fully up to speed and they kind of knew what his limitations were, he was 3 years into his pro career and his waiver clock was done. And they had to put up the waivers. Right. But you can't control when guys get hurt. You can't control a lot. But you can control sort of what the plan is and how you articulate the plan. And, especially as much as, I've never had to tell a 20-year-old all-star professional athlete, hey, we're sending you to Stockton and here's the plan for you. And it's a shitty situation. It's a shitty conversation to have with a person. But in some cases, if you believe in your heart of hearts that the best way to make sure that Sam Bennett, Juuso Välimäki, Jeremy Poirier, Jacob Pelche, whoever, they're going to be the best NHL player, the best kind of asset for your organization in a year or two, sometimes you got to bite the bullet.
Your examples are why I am so adamant that the coaches have a role to play in development. And last year, Daryl he does not want to develop at the NHL level. I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, Ryan, and you were around then too, but I don't think that Bob Hartley did Sam Bennett any favors by pumping his tires as hard as he did, as often as he did, to the point where it almost felt like, man, if they just got this Bennett kid in the lineup, they'd be fine. Like, that was over promotion. And I would say it was the kind of not, it was a different scenario, but I don't think Daryl liked Välimäki, and Daryl wasn't going to play Välimäki. So what were you going to do with Välimäki? And you end up losing him on. And that's where I think you have to be on. Just let me finish this. Sorry about this. I want you to answer this. But that my point being is, this is where the coach and the GM have to be on the same plane and have the same plan. And I'm all for promoting young guys and giving them their props. But I thought Hartley was, and it was the reverse on Berchi. I thought Hartley was way too hard on Berchi.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that might be where the Flames have such a good situation here, because Ryan Huska saw the American League team quite a bit last year. Sure. So did Craig Conroy. Like the Flames, I think the nice thing is the Flames are going in, like they have a coaching staff where Cale McLean is going into main camp, having seen all these guys. Huska has seen all these guys. Sure. Pretty much most of their pro scouting apparatus, most of their dev team has seen all these guys. It's a lot of the same people. Mike, you have a few new faces there. Like Michael Stone hasn't seen a lot of these guys. He might have played with a few of them, but he sort of, you get a different perspective. And I think going into a camp like this, where you're going to have so many of these young guys potentially knocking on the door, you kind of want to, I think having those perspectives will give you a better sense of who's ready, who's not. And I think the biggest thing is when you go, oh, so-and-so is not ready. Well, why aren't they ready? What part are they ready for? And I think that might be one of the big benefits of having the AHL club in town, because you have the ability of, Matt Brown's their mental performance coach. You can sit Matt Brown down with somebody and he can give you a pretty good assessment of how they're doing in terms of grasping the nuances of specific things. Same with, if they're defensemen, you can plunk them down with Michael Stone. You can plunk them down as a forward with Martin Jalna. Goalies can sit down with Sigalet. They have a lot of resources they didn't have before. And not only do they not have them, but I think the way they're situated now makes it really easy for them to maximize the effectiveness of those resources. And it's all well and good to have them, but you got to use them well. And I think this is going to be a really interesting camp for that part, because, Walker Duehr came in last year and knocked on the door, because what was the worst case scenario for Walker Duehr? He came up as an injury call up, and if it didn't work out, oh boohoo, they would send him down, and maybe they bring up somebody else. Maybe it'd be Clark Bishop, maybe it'd be Kevin Rooney, but someone else would have gotten his spot if he wasn't ready for it. But he seemed like he was ready for it. But I think the big challenge is we saw. As much as some of us are loath to it, but when Daryl said it was right, Jacob Pelche did not have a good training camp last year. So we're heading into the Penticton tournament starting Friday. And, we're prepping sort of some notes for ourselves for what we want to watch in terms of player assessment, in terms of just benchmarking guys. And you would expect Matt Coronado, if Matt Coronado is going to be an NHL regular, and a lot of people think he could be or should be, but if he's going to be an NHL regular, he needs to stand out. He needs to look like a guy who played in the World Championships, who played high in college, who was a great, very good to borderline great college player during his 2 years. He needs to look like a guy that, if you didn't have name bars or numbers, typically speaking, this is the kind of environment where you should be able to point out the guys who are first or second round draft picks. So if he doesn't stand out, he should. If he doesn't, why? But you really expect you expect these guys, like you kind of expected Pelche to stand out a bit more than he did in last year's Penticton camp and in certain portions of the preseason. And so when you're playing when you're playing that split squad game on the Monday between Seattle and Calgary in 2 different cities, and you're sending the odds and sods, and you're basically saying the Wranglers and whichever junior players are still kicking around to Climate Pledge to go play Seattle. So you're probably expecting your younger guys, the guys who are your top end prospects, you expect them to stand out. And even if the team loses, you expect them to sort of carry the mail a bit in those kind of environments. So it's about, I think a lot of it is about building the context for what the expectations are for players and why not they will succeed or struggle. But I think this is going to be a fascinating camp because I think they have a lot of different tools in place that they didn't really have or didn't integrate well in the past. But I also think, they have a lot of players who I think are further ahead than they were a year ago. And I think you're going to be able to really do some nice comparisons in terms of where guys are at in their development.
Well, maybe in the new building, they can take a page out of the Blue Jays Dunedin complex and have the Department of Science and Human Anatomy or whatever they do down there, their high performance training center. Okay, let's get into Penticton, because you said something that the crusty, grumpy old me wants to fire back at, which is they should. But I went to enough Pentictons and saw enough high prospects or just go through the motions and get to another level when God forbid when Goudreau went and we were keeping track of his points and combining them with his preseason points and all that stuff. Tell me who you're watching and who you've seen this Flames roster. Who are you watching?
Okay, I'll throw out a couple obvious ones and I'll throw out some dark horses that I'm watching for other reasons. Sure. Obviously, Honzek and Coronado are first-round picks.
Yes.
Honzek is man-shaped already. He's big. He needs to thicken out a little bit, I think, but he's the kind of kid that, he'll go from being a lanky 18 to a thick 20 or 22. I don't think he'll have any issues with that. But in terms of some of the darker horses, I really want to see how Etienne Morin, how he's a great skater. He has... I've been told by scouts, maybe not Oliver Shillington level skating, but not far off.
Wow.
And, at the draft, Todd Button was really complimentary about how dynamic he can be in terms of using his teammates, using time and space, and sort of using a lot of little subtleties in his game to create space for passes and for offensive plays. So Morin, I haven't seen a lot of in person, but I'm really looking forward to seeing him both in Penticton and hopefully a bunch in preseason, because he's one of those guys that scouts kept telling me, holy cow, he could have gone to the first round. He is that kind of talent.
Wow, okay.
The other 2 guys I'm looking at are Parker Bell, from Tri-City, and William Stromgren, formerly of a bunch of places in Sweden, but now the Wranglers. Parker Bell is about to turn 20. He's a 2003 birthday, so he could be playing in the American League as a 20-year-old, or he could be playing in the Western League as an overager. And so if he has a good week or 2 here, if he looks like he could be a pro player, he could conceivably close out the month of September by getting an entry-level contract. And I don't think you can say that for a lot of these guys here. A lot of the guys who don't have contracts are definitely heading back elsewhere. A lot of the unsigned junior guys, like I don't think Jaden Lipinski will get a contract this week, for example. I don't think Morin will get a contract this week. But some of the other guys have chances. But I think Bell, I think Bell legitimately could put pen to paper if he looks like they think he can look. He was really, really good for Tri-City last year. And I think, people who I know who follow the Western League look at him and say, he's a guy who's got size and he knows how to use it. And it's a question of, can he put it all together and become sort of a Michael Ferlandy type at the NHL? He's I'd say he's sort of up there with Lucas Siona in terms of guys who are big and burly, but also don't lack skill and are able to sort of use their size to maximize the skill they have.
Okay.
And Stromgren, Stromgren is one of those guys that, I saw a lot of folks criticizing the Flames a bit for picking Stromgren instead of other guys. I think Logan Stankoven was available when Stromgren was picked in the second round in 21. I really like Stromgren as a player because he's got size and he's been playing in the Swedish system that really emphasizes structure and two-way play. And he hasn't played a lot. He hasn't gotten, a big role in Swedish Pro. because in Europe, if you're someone that they think might bolt, or if you're just a 21-year-old, you're a fourth liner and you're a penalty killer, and then you earn what you earn your keep, and then you get older and you move a little bit up the rotation a bit.
Yep.
And in kind of doing yeoman's work as a penalty killer and two-way guy in the bottom six for a couple teams, he was really effective. And during the last couple of weeks of the season in the SHL, he looked really good. And then he came over to the Wranglers at the end of last season and played a couple of games and didn't look out of place. And especially for a guy who hasn't really played on the small ice that much.
Yeah.
He's the kind of guy that, because he's had that pro polish in the Swedish system, I think he could click with what the Flames do quicker than a lot of other young guys. So those are the handful of guys I'm really looking forward to. But part of the fun of these tournaments, Rob, as you well know, you kind of want to see who stands out, because there's plenty of guys. There's been plenty of guys who the Flames have brought in on AHL deals in the past. Ryan Lomberg ended up getting an NHL deal. Garnet Hathaway, a lot of other guys. You kind of want to see if one of these guys on AHL deals comes in and really grabs hold of it, because they might not get NHL careers carved out as a result of this, but if you're somebody playing minor pro, the pay difference between being on a two-way NHL deal and being on an AHL only deal, it's pretty substantial, and you can set yourself up for a pretty good career by having a good few weeks. But
those two guys you mentioned are serviceable NHL players. Right.
Yeah. And they didn't have to give up anything to get them.
No. All right. I'll come back to camp in a second. You said something interesting, and I know it's a ritual for you every Sunday night, but tell me about the mailbag, because as we head into this week, everything's fresh. What are the fans asking? Where is their pulse on this? Because we're all going to do the same thing. I've already seen, here are my top 5 stories coming into camp and things like that. And we can make, I guess, the conversations. I'm curious what people are asking you about right now.
It's a lot of questions about, when are the trades happening? Okay. And primarily circling around, Hanifin and Vladar for trades. Okay. A lot of, I think that the discourse around Elias Lindholm, especially since he did that interview with that Swedish outlet a couple weeks ago, has shifted a bit from, oh no, what's going on with Lindholm, to when's Lindholm signing?
Right.
And I think folks are sort of I think they're pre-anxious about the number. We don't have a number. We don't even have a contract yet. But I think people are starting to get riled up about a number that hasn't happened yet. So, I mean,
that seems so strange to me. You're serious.
Yeah. It's like, oh man, I wouldn't pay a first line center that much money. But I don't know. And so
I get it.
But I also think folks are very curious about, we've seen a lot of PTOs, our friends at Cap Friendly have kept their website up to date with all the PTOs. A team that's conspicuously absent from the PTO run is the Calgary Flames.
I know.
And when you have your GM very publicly and very vehemently and doubling down on it in further media availabilities, Craig Conroy really thinks they should have some young blood in the lineup. Yep. And they've left some spots open. By my math, you probably got 3 to 5 spots that could conceivably be guys who are on entry-level deals. And that is a gigantic departure. And I think folks are going to be a little anxious until that camp roster comes out next week and it doesn't have a lot of PTOs. I think probably people are bracing themselves for maybe 1 or 2 PTOs. Like, I figure Brett Sutter will be in a PTO technically, because if you're, the Flames don't have his NHL rights, so they need to sign to a PTO to show up to main camp.
Well, and that you mentioned the doubleheader, right, Ryan? Like, there's a requirement,
counts as a veteran,
right? And you have to have X amount of players. Sometimes that's why you hire. That's sometimes why you sign a couple of PTOs, right?
Yeah, and especially if you have guys coming off of injuries, like I imagine for forwards, they probably won't be leaning on Mangiapane too much in their early preseason games. They did that with Chris Tanev last year, so they'll probably listen to their medical personnel. But aside from a handful of guys carrying over from rookie camp, like the guys on AHL contracts have to sign PTOs. I assume they will, but beyond that, like I don't really think there's a lot of spots that scream you need a veteran here. And I think the nice thing for the Flames, and as much as fans don't want to hear this, as much of a tire fire as portions of the 22-23 season were, you got a chance to see Pelche audition in kind of unideal circumstances. You threw him in, and I don't think it's a secret that the coach wasn't really on board with throwing kids into key roles right away. I think if you look at how Daryl Sutter's traditionally used kids, they sort of start to that. He basically be at home in Sweden in terms of how they use young guys. With you get them, they get the scraps and they work their way up. And traditionally, that's how he's used the kids. If you look at how Pelche was used, he got some really good deployments early on, and then the quality of his deployments fell off. But he, considering who he was playing with and who he's playing against, he held his own pretty well. And then he went back and had a really good AHL playoffs. So I think you learned something about Pelche's skill set and how it can translate. You saw Coronado practice with the group. You saw him in a nothing game, but you saw him. And I think they get a sense of how his game translate. Especially, I think seeing Coronado in the World Championships gives your scouts extra reps, your development team extra reps to sort of see how he can be used. So I think the specific circumstance the Flames are at, where if you look at the young guys that probably will push for jobs, Coronado, Dor, Pelche, those are guys you've seen quite a bit in pro or pro adjacent situations in the last year. And I think you've learned a lot about them. And I think you have the ability, this isn't like, it's not like you're bringing in Sean Monahan fresh from the Ottawa 67s in the draft and saying, gosh, I hope he looks okay. You kind of know how these guys are going to look. And I think that really gives them a bit of a barometer and a bit of a benchmark to set these guys with. Because I think if I'm the head coach, if I'm the GM, I can sit down with these guys on day one of camp. You do your entry meetings, and you pull these guys aside and say, "Hey, we know what your guys are capable of. We've seen it. We've done it here. You've done it with this jersey and in this building. And so just do the thing. You don't need to do anything different than you've already been doing." And I think that could potentially take a lot of pressure off those kids, and B, I think if they're not sort of in their own heads or freaking out about the opportunity, I think they have the opportunity to be much more successful in camp than they would be in a different pressure cooker.
I'm a little bit different in the sense that my fascination is almost with the blue line, and it's in a weird spot because it's not necessarily an impact spot, but with no Troy Stetcher and with no Michael Stone, I am kind of curious who rides the 7th spot or the 8th spot or what that looks like.
I'm just really curious. I did a piece on the site earlier last week. How do the pairings look? Because even if you assume that you're starting 7, I really like Dennis Gilbert, but based on the way that the cap hits are, I think Dennis Gilbert's the 8th guy on the depth chart right now behind Osterley, and your top 6 are probably in some combination.
I forgot about Osterley.
Yeah, but you have Hanifin, Anderson, you have Shillington, right, Tanev, and you got Zadorov and Uyghur. You could basically pick names out of a hat, and you're going to get completely different looks. Yeah. And the big question for me is okay, your best defenseman, Rasmus Anderson, got hit by a friggin' car last year and still played 20 games afterwards and looked pretty good. Yep. How good can he be when he's not recovering from getting hit by a vehicle? Yep. Uyghur was sort of figuring out his entire place existentially within the city, within the franchise, all kinds of things. And after the All-Star break, he was spectacular. He was probably he was probably top 10 in the league in terms of just being effective at anything he was being asked to do on both sides of the ice. And so if he can come in and he looks anything close to how he did in April, that's a bonus. Oliver Shillington, didn't play for a year, which does 2 things. One, it might be a bit of a rust on him because he hasn't really played high-end hockey in a year. But also, he hasn't been traveling. He hasn't been having 200-pound guys crashing into him against the stationary boards on the time. So in terms of, I have no idea what to expect from Shillington because...
Can I give you another little piece in that?
Yeah.
He's been a pro hockey player since he was 16.
Yeah.
Right? He came over. Do you remember when he came over and played the American Hockey League All-Stars? You remember that?
Yeah. He was in Fargestad that year. And then he got drafted, and then he was playing pro hockey at 18 in a foreign country.
Right. And he had already played 2 years of pro prior to that. So it's interesting to me that he's the one, and I'm not talking about the reasons. Those are personal and very important and should be treated with respect. But it's very interesting to me that he's the one that took the year off because he's been playing at that level for so long. I wonder what that does.
Yeah. And just especially the idea of, everyone's mental health journey is their own journey. But the way I look at him from both a human and a player standpoint is conceivably he might have been white knuckling it for God knows how long.
Oh,
and
Absolutely.
He was so good in 21-22, and I don't think we've seen nearly his best. I don't think we've seen him at peace with the world, at peace with himself, at peace with, you know, wherever he wanted to get dealt with. So I really don't think we've seen anywhere close to how good Oliver Kylington can be. And if Oliver Kylington comes back and is anything close to what he was with Chris Tanev in that 21-22 season, then your top four blue line, not just for this season, but potentially for the foreseeable future, contains Weegar, Anderson, Kylington, and then you just need to find someone to play with the odd man out. That could be very good. And I think that gives you a lot of things to work from. And I think, you know, if as I always get one or two sarcastic questions. Yeah. I hope they're sarcastic because, you know, I don't treat them very seriously from fans on Twitter when I'm doing the mailbag. They're like, one person commented, "Oh God, how bad are the Flames going to be this year?" On paper, I'm not convinced they're going to be all that bad because they have enough talent that if they're aligned properly, if they're used properly, and if they can, you know, I think at worst, the Calgary Flames last year looked too much like six guys doing their own thing and not so much like one cohesive unit. If you can get these guys working in symphony, working in harmony with the skill sets that they have from top to bottom, they're going to be a faster team with no Lewis, with no Lucic, with no various Ritchie brothers. They're going to be they're going to be a younger team. Yeah. And I think they're going to be a team that, you know, from top to bottom, like between the guys who are trying to knock on the door and carve out NHL roles for themselves, guys who aren't really, you know, NHL regulars or NHL locks, to the guys who are a year from free agency or a couple years from free agency, I think you're going to have a lot of guys come in with a chip on their shoulder because, you know, I vividly remember this, Rob. I remember covering that 13-14 year. And actually also that 14-15 year. 14-15 is the one that really sticks in my mind because 14-15, they finished the 13-14 season fourth from last. They drafted fourth overall because they were fourth from the basement. They were flatly not good.
Oh,
and the
I'm
hockey
very aware.
Establishment looked at that and went, okay, Flames were lousy last year. They'll be lousy this year. And the Flame, like speaking to a lot of players at the time, you know, every time we sort of brought up external expectations, they sort of chuckled and went, yeah, we'll see. Because I think, you know, these are all very proud individuals. Like they've all been very good at what they've done. Yeah. You know, disclosure fans, the worst NHLer is so much better than you and I at hockey. It's crazy. But all these guys come in and I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder because I think they're going to have spent, you know, pretty much since April, you know, looking at people go, oh, you know, the losing to the Oilers blew up the Flames, haha, or, oh, this happened to the Flames, haha, or, you know, this, that, the other thing. I think a lot of people wearing Flaming C's this year, from probably from the front office on down, are going to be very motivated to rub it in people's faces. And when you have that kind of external motivation, you can do some things. I think a lot of the 14-15 success was part of it was puck luck, but part of it was because they just played their asses off because they felt like they had a point to prove.
Yeah, that was the find away Flames, right? Like, you know, they were analytical darlings, weren't they?
Oh, they're analytical darlings till they weren't. And then 15-16, I think the chickens came home to roost from that perspective.
They did.
But I mean, like, this is a team that if you look at the analytical progression, you know, and we can dive into the minutia of this another time because I have charts and everything, bud. But if you look at the minutia of the Treliving / Conroy now era Flames, they have gradually become a very good, occasionally elite possession team. Last year, elite possession didn't turn into much of anything because they had a bunch of stuff going on around the elite possession that undermined it. The year before, they were a very good to borderline elite possession team that just beat the brakes off of teams at sometimes. So I don't think, you know, to use the Hubertoism, I don't think they forgot how to play hockey over the course of the year. And, you know, I don't think that they're necessarily going to hit the reset button and be 21, 22, or 18, 19 good. But I also don't think they're anywhere near as bad as the hockey establishment thinks they are.
No, I think they're I think the expectation should be a playoff team. I think that they were almost a playoff team last year and were so disappointing in the way that they played.
They missed the playoffs by 3 points with everyone having like one of their worst seasons ever, except for Backlund and a couple other guys, and their best defenseman getting hit by a car during the playoff push.
Which is true. But it begs the question, And this is what I'm curious about the mailbag sometimes is it just good enough to make the playoffs? I'm not saying they're a Stanley Cup contender. I don't believe that. Now, I could be proven wrong if certain things happen, but I believe they're a playoff team. And if Florida showed you anything last year, just get in, blah, 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 blah. But I'm curious because we went through this a couple months ago during the draft, blow it all up, start over, rebuild, right? There is that appetite out there. Yeah. Is there an appetite just to be a playoff team?
I think I'll say this. I think fans, at least the fans I interact with, they kind of want to know what the plan is. And I think the problem is now, like, I don't think we're expecting Craig Conroy to come out with like a whiteboard, and sort of sketch everything out. But I think I think what kind of roster we see, what kind of moves we see between now and maybe Christmas will really tell us a lot about what the trajectory of the team is. Because they're a team that, they've got a pretty good farm system, but it's not elite. I think they have, their farm system is good. I think, various places, I think, Stephen Ellis at Daily Faceoff ranked them 17th.
Yeah.
That feels about right.
Yeah, right. Middle of the pack.
They have, I'd say system-wise, they don't have your tippity top elite players outside of maybe Dustin Wolf, because you need to draft very high in order to get those guys.
Correct.
But they've consistently, in the early and even late rounds, found serviceable guys that can step in. I mean, when we're talking about, they still have to go through the Martian progression, but Bell and Siona feel like guys that could be third and fourth liners on a good team, if they keep marching through. Right. And so, as much as you want every player to be kind of a home run, you're also looking at guys who can step in that you don't have to expend assets to get. And they've been pretty good at finding kind of role guys. I think the challenge is, though, can they find out those role guys that can be a little bit more? Or can they have those guys that take a chance on? Like, Johnny Gaudreau was a very astute pick in 2011, but he was also the kind of guy where they took, he was their third pick of that draft. Third or fourth rounder, but I think it was their third pick because they didn't have a first.
Well, I might even.
He was their fourth. You're right.
He was their fourth.
They went
Berchi doing this. Yeah.
Berchi was the consensus, safe pick. He was the Sean Monahan style pick at 11 or 13 because I think they went. Yeah, that's
Wotherspoon and Granlund.
Wotherspoon and Granlund were very good. Wotherspoon was a very, very reliable defender on a very good junior team. And Granlund had the bloodlines and he had success in Finland. And then they're like, okay, they took three guys from three different leagues, or I guess three guys from two different leagues that were sort of safe picks, and then take a swing, and the swing turned out to be a very good swing. And that 11 draft was pretty good because they got Laurent Brossoit out of it too. But if you look at sort of the modern Flames drafting philosophy, I think if you look at kind of how they did things in 11, you can see a lot of the through lines to today, because what they do, goalie late, swings in the mid rounds at smallish offensive players, and then they basically went with the scouting consensus earlier on, and it turned into one of their better drafts ever. I think the successful drafts they've had have sort of led to that. But they're an organization where if they rebuilt, I think the guys that they have signed long term are too good for the team to completely tank, which hurts. And so if you paint yourself in that corner, you might as well go for it, right?
Well, that's
as dumb as it sounds.
No, this is a good time to remind people that if you draft two players in a draft that play 100 plus NHL games, that's the exception. That's not the rule. Like if you look at 32 teams, right?
And I'll go further, man. I'll go further. Yeah. I think right now, especially, maybe the bar was set low after the Darryl Sutter regime when he was GM. If you can, especially with how important development is, like, we've talked about this in the past, I think. If you look at we talked about Oscar Dansk, right person for the role he's in. Brett Sutter, right person for the role he's in. And I think they look at a lot of different, personality types and skill sets and try to pluck specific people to sit in their farm system. Because, as much as it probably will hurt the Flames and Flames fans to see, the Hershey Bears play in the fall with Matthew Phillips, I think you're going to look at his time in Calgary with the Wranglers and earlier on with Stockton and go, man, he was so good, and playing with someone that good really accelerated the development of a lot of players that they had high hopes for.
Dear sir, did you just demote Matthew Phillips? You are not even putting him on the Capitals roster at this point. You're putting him in Hershey.
He hasn't made the team yet.
Well, it's true. No, that technically that is true.
But you know, if you at this point, like if you're able to find really good minor league players, if they serve a developmental purpose, are important. And they can really help get your people to where they need to be.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think they've done a really capable job. But, you know, the folks who criticize the Flames drafting and go, yeah, but they haven't found a lot of stars. Yeah, you're right. They haven't found a lot of stars. And they have, you know, in places around where the Flames have picked, there's been stars picked in different areas above and below. And I think it's a fair criticism to say, no, why didn't they pick that guy? But I also think that with the way they do it, I think they're looking at it in terms of trying to get a bunch of different things and a bunch of different people in a bunch of different positions.
You know, I love this conversation because I think it's sometimes it's just too base. Like there's nuance to this. You brought up a great name, Laurent Brossoit. That is a great pick at where he was picked and what he does. He's an NHL capable goaltender that was taken in the 5th round, right? And
I think 6th or 7th. He was picked
so I think
6th or 7th. But he was the backup goalie for the Edmonton Oil Kings, and that was sort of the era. I believe they had him and Tristan Jarry, and they brought in a few other guys through the Oil Kings at that point. Like they were a factory, and they did such a good job developing players. And if you look at sort of the people both who played for the Oil Kings and who coached the Oil Kings, they're all over hockey right now in development factories because they tried to replicate what worked in Edmonton.
Well, and the other one I brought up, and I brought it up with Connie when he sat in here for a couple minutes earlier in July, was Fox. That still counts. I don't care what anybody. That's a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman who won it early in his career, who was taken in the 3rd round. Right,
and that's a product of you know Button and Feaster, and later on Treliving also. I mean, I think one of the better things that the Flames did during you know, Jay Feaster gets a lot of credit. I believe Brian Burke's exact phrasing when he dismissed Burke or dismissed Treliving or not Feaster. He dismissed Feaster. He gave him credit. I believe he used the phrase, he shoveled out the barn for us. Yeah. And he had kind of a thankless job, and they got rid of some bad contracts, and they built up the drafting and development team a bit. They put in some really clear metrics and some really clear things. They integrated data into it. And then Treliving came in and said, well, how's this work? Okay, cool. What do you need? Okay, let's build onto it. And then they built onto it and built onto it. And heck, you know, we're at the point now where we just saw the announcement, you know, over the weekend where the Flames have hired more scouts. They've hired more development people. They have more development staff than they did before. They have different configurations and more amateur scouts than they did before. They haven't officially they haven't had a dedicated reserve list scout until this year with Peter Labardius. It's like I think that's this, you know, there's always a tendency when you know you have a regime change to, you know, burn the boats, burn down what it came before and build something new. But I think, you know, one of the more savvy things that was done over the last 15, 20 years in the city has been Flames brass coming in and going, well, hold on a second. What was the plan here? What worked? Right. Okay. Right. What do you need then? What do you need to make this work better? And if you look at, you know, how the Flames worked, I mean, Treliving added a bunch of USHL and collegiate scouts into that area, and lo and behold, you know, they found Adam Fox. They found a bunch of guys like Emilio Peterson was one of those guys that came out of that system too, out of that scouting regime. So you know, it's guys that you might not have found before that helped your team and helped your system.
All this goes without saying. This is neither one of us saying that finishing into the lottery and winning a lottery or drafting first overall for 4 of 6 years or whatever that was that our friends of the North did. Remember, there's only one legacy team, and they're not truly a legacy team because they're not original 6, but there's only one team for the 21 team NHL that has never drafted first, never drafted higher than 4th. And that's the Calgary Flames. And it's impossible. And
I'm pretty sure at the end of October, Rob, when I go up and watch the outdoor game up there, we're having pops. I'm pretty sure some folks up there will refer to the Decade of Darkness. And the reason why they call it Decade of Darkness, you know, Brad Treliving's phrasing whenever he talked about someone says, oh, you're going to trade up, you're going to get the first, second, whatever overall pick. He always sort of winced and went, teams won't go through a lot of pain to get those picks. You know, they call it the Decade of Darkness in Edmonton because, and I don't think it's unfair to say, the team is lousy for a long time. And so
20 years.
The team, especially during that Decade of Darkness, they were borderline unwatchable. And you know, our poor friends in the North had to, that's all they had to watch.
Yes.
For hockey. For, I think at that point they might have even had the Oil Kings.
No, and it's impossible to sell tickets. It's impossible to do this. It's impossible to do that. For a fan who only is worried about the results, I get it. But when you're looking at the business of hockey, it's death.
Yeah,
it's
and
death.
Imagine being a hockey fan in that city, and first of all, you don't have Chinooks, and you're farther north, so the winter is darker and colder and never ends. And also, your hockey team's terrible, and it's been terrible last year, and it was terrible the year before. You can't remember the last time they were any good.
No, listen. I have no sympathy for them. Before I let you go, I got two more questions for you. One, and you just brought it up, and I'll bring it up because I ranted on it on Friday. Terribly disappointed that it's just going to be a straight NHL game at the Heritage Classic. And it feels like we're checking a box just to make sure that Connor McDavid gets to play a home outdoor game. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, and I mean, like especially, I mean, we talk about how good the alumni group is here, and Rob, I don't need to tell you any of that because quite well. They have a pretty good alumni group in Edmonton too, and I think it would have been so fun to have kind of like a party atmosphere of just, you're telling a generation of fans, hey, come on down. We're gonna, you might not be able to get Kiprusoff over, but you could probably get Mike Vernon to play. You can get Brent Cron and those guys. You can get, a bunch of the Oilers faithful too, and you could have had like a cool, fun, nostalgic thing. Like you could do, like I understand not wanting to wreck up the ice, and I get it, but I mean, I don't think you'd have to worry about, these guys in their 40s and 50s wrecking up the ice, carving too much. It'd be basically a glorified shinny game, but it would have been a lot of fun.
And you can do it after. Like, I get it. Okay, so you want to protect the ice. I get it. But leave the ice in for a week. Right? Let the other teams play. To me, it's got to be a festival, Ryan. Because I'm always the guy that defends the outdoor classics against the establishment. No, you got to do it.
Well, especially the idea, like they're for that market. They're for that home market.
Yes.
So the idea is you're like, especially, at their best, the outdoor games are, they're meant to be a party. They're meant to be like, okay, if they're live, you get the atmosphere. And, it's meant to sort of be for you. But if you're watching on TV and they do so many of these things, you want it to be a party. Like, I think Seattle, Vegas is going to be a friggin' blast because that's going to be so weird, man. But it's going to be it's going to be so fun to have an outdoor game.
That Anaheim LA game was cool.
Yeah, that was really, even the Lake Tahoe games they did during the pandemic season. Those were weird, but they were like the fun kind of weird. And I kind of, I like the idea of the NHL trying weird new things, but I also kind of like the idea of them like, you want to make it a fun party. You want to sort of, say to fans, hey, you haven't seen Jerome again to play in this ice in a while. We'll bring him in. Him and Conroy can be on an alumni team together. It'll be fun. But we're not going to see. I think a lot of fans would have driven 3 hours in October to watch Jelena, Iginla, and Conroy play in an alumni game. And I think a lot of Oilers fans.
You could have brought Donovan in. You could have brought Clark in. You could have brought McLennan in. You could have brought a whole bunch of guys from 03, 04, 20 years later, right? And the Red Mile team still sells. Commodore could have been there, right? Like, you ship in Marcus Nielsen and you send them up there.
You can get some of those Oilers guys from the same era. I mean, that would have been, cool little system, but, you and I aren't in charge. But
No, we're not. And the NHL's got to wake up because they have a responsibility to build the game. They're just checking boxes again, and that's what pisses me off.
I just hope there's a media skate. I'm selfish. I just hope there's a media skate.
I said that before. A media skate. There should be a junior game. There should be a college game. There should be a women's game. There should be minor hockey games. And yeah, I get it. And listen, Matty Callan down at the Dome right now is listening to this, throwing things at his computer because he's a guy that travels around. Him and Richard Gurney from Calgary help make the ice in these places. And I know it's difficult to put the ice in, and we know there's weather challenges. I get that. But who and what are you? This is intended to be a celebration. It's intended to help grow the game. Again, and this is me taking a shot at the Oilers and Connor McDavid, but this one just feels like, well, Connor better have a home game outdoors on his resume. That's what this feels like. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be fun it's going to be a cool atmosphere, but yeah, I think it's going to miss some of the coolness that could have had having a bunch of more fun things sort of around it, making it more of a big week-long party. Cause it's right now it feels like, it'd be game 13. So it's like,
yeah,
okay,
right. That's what it feels like, right?
Rather than be like, hey, everybody come to Edmonton for the whole weekend. We'll have a thing on Friday. We'll have a thing on Saturday. It could be something a lot more than it is. And I kind of wish it was a bit more than it is, because it would have made it a lot more fun. But it's still going to be fun. I think when you get 60,000 people in that stadium, and you hear the very dueling "Go Flames, go!" "Go Oilers, go" chants, that's going to be a lot of fun.
No, it'll be good. It bugs me that they could do more and have fun. So here we are firing it up. It's not firing it up. It's like FlamesNation went dark for 3. It's probably been the busiest of all of the websites and stuff that I follow all year. So it's not like you're all of a sudden firing things up. But as the managing editor, what should we be paying attention for at FlamesNation right now?
Well, we're closing out our annual prospect rankings. We're at number 3 now, and then we got the first 2. Number 1.
I wonder who's number 1.
I wonder who's number 3 was Jacob Pelche, published Monday, and then we have 2 more to go, and then we'll have our state of the prospect snapshot, and then Friday games get going. 8:30 start on Friday night in Calgary time. We'll have a lot of Penticton coverage. None of us are going to Penticton, but our friend Chris Faber from Canucks Army will be there live.
Oh, good.
He'll be sending us his live observations, and we'll have we treat the Penticton games like we do every other game. We'll be doing full breakdowns after every single game. That Monday morning game will be kind of a weird one to try to figure out how we're going to juggle all of that. But this is the fun time. It's we've gone from we've been, I think, speaking for all the fans I talked to, everyone's sort of been nervously twiddling our thumbs all summer, going, okay, when's this stuff getting going? Because we've been hearing about all the things that could happen or might happen or maybe will happen, but now things are going to start happening, and
they have no choice. Regardless, yes.
Yeah, we got three Penticton games and a couple days off, and then the Flames main camp reports, and then the next Sunday is their first preseason game, and then they play a bunch of preseason games, and then all of a sudden, October 11th, and we'll be watching the Jets play the Flames at the Dome. This is the time of year that the next 3 days before the puck drops on in Penticton will seem like 100 years, and then it'll all go like that.
Yeah, and I've said it before. I sound like an old curmudgeon, but this is that period of time I don't like right now, because somewhere along the line the captain skates became popular, and then your boss goes, you should go down and talk to the players at the captain skates. So you go down and talk to them, and then it's the first day. You ought to go talk to them first day of training camp, and it's the same old BS until I'll tell you what I'm really fascinated by, Ryan, and I don't know, maybe I'm weird on this. I want to see how Huska runs a camp, because I've been through enough. We're going to play a 3-on-3 tournament for the next 2 days, or we're going to no pucks for 4 days, or whatever. I'm curious. Selfishly,
I'm kind of curious what kind of drills they do, because just the idea of I think you can learn a lot about what they want to do from their drills.
100%.
So it's the most fascinating time of year. And I think, folks have, between 5 and 500 questions about what the team is going to be like this year, and this year setting the tone for the next 3 to 5. We're going to start getting some forms of answers starting as early as Friday. And I think it's going to be very exciting. It's never dull covering the Calgary Flames. It's always a privilege to cover. I think this is I don't even want to I started covering the team in 10-11.
Yeah.
And I've been credentialed since the lockout 12-13 years. And this is like the better part of more than a quarter of my life has been spent doing this. But I'm very fortunate to do it, and really excited for us to share all the things we see, we write. We have I'll say this, Rob, you sort of hinted at something that fun that's coming out in the spring.
Very excited.
We have a lot of stuff we haven't teased yet that we have coming up.
Very cool.
Probably starting as soon as the first Penticton game, in terms of content we're going to start rolling out and testing out and getting fans' feedback on, because this is supposed to be fun. We're meant to augment fans' enjoyment of this fine sport, and so we're going to try some stuff out. And if you like what you're doing, tweet at me. If you hate what we're doing, tweet at Kerr YYC.
There you go. Yeah. Awesome. Now finally somebody will talk to me. Ryan, I appreciate this as always. Great to have you back on board. We will connect with you, I guess, after a game actually on Monday. We will have game results to talk about. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, talk to you soon, bud.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.